The road to Crestone, Colorado, twisted like a serpent through the San Luis Valley, its narrow curves and patches of crumbling asphalt making it feel less like a route and more like a warning. Zane Mercer watched the GPS signal flicker in and out as the elevation climbed above 8,000 feet, the vast horizon of the Sangre de Cristo Mountains, looming ahead like jagged fangs against a bruised sky. He rolled the window down and took a deep breath of cold, pine-scented air. Thin, the kind of air that made your chest tighten and your brain tingle if you weren't used to it. Zane wasn't. He was a city dweller, Los Angeles born and bred, and this remote Colorado town felt 1,000 miles from everything that made sense. He was here for a story. Not just any story, the story. One that could save his collapsing career as an investigative podcaster. Something about Crestone had always tugged at the edges of conspiracy threads, spiritual cults, disappearances, even UFO sightings. Reddit forums whispered about it, YouTube rabbit holes hinted at it, but no one had ever gotten inside, until now. The town itself was barely a town. A single grocery store, one diner, 2 gas pumps, and a collection of eccentric houses scattered across the landscape like someone had dropped Monopoly pieces from the sky. Most of them were adobe style, some shaped like domes or pyramids, odd spiritual architecture, nestled against the mountains. Zane's rental cabin was small but clean, just outside the main drag. He unpacked quickly, setting up his field recorder and camera gear. The town had no cell service and spotty Wi-Fi, which meant no distractions. Perfect for digging deep. That night, he visited the local diner, a place called the Golden Root. Journalist, the waitress asked, eyeing his notepad. Podcaster, he corrected. She didn't seem impressed. You're not the first to come here looking for whatever it is people think is here. And how many leave? He asked. She didn't answer, just refilled his coffee and walked away. Zane started interviewing locals the next morning. Most weren't interested. Some warned him to stop. A few offered vague insights about energy centers, dimensions, and divine frequencies. But one name kept surfacing: the Sanctuary of the Inner Flame, a spiritual retreat hidden deeper in the mountains, invitation only. It was rumored to be the hub of something ancient and secretive. A woman named Dr. Marisol Caney was said to run it, a former neuroscientist turned spiritual leader. Zane became obsessed. He finally found someone willing to speak. Daniel Kessler, a former retreat attendee who now lived in a rusted RV on the edge of town. Daniel's eyes were hollow. They burned something up there, he said, voice cracking. Not incense, not sage, something, older. I heard it in the chanting. I saw it in the fog. The mountain remembers things. What did you see, Daniel? Daniel didn't blink. You'll see it too. If you stay long enough. Days passed in a strange blur. Zane walked the town during daylight, leaving notes on doors and windows, asking questions that no one seemed eager to answer. The locals gave him sideways glances, not hostile, but hollow, like their curiosity had long since been burned out of them. He recorded voice memos to himself every night. I'm beginning to feel like this place breathes. Not in the way cities breathe, with traffic and motion, but in a slower, deeper rhythm, like it's alive beneath the skin. On the 4th night, after hours of silence, someone knocked on his cabin door. Zane hesitated. No one should have known where he was staying. He opened it slowly. A woman stood there, still as stone. She wore a patchy wool cloak with dark braids tucked beneath her hood. Her face was weathered and her eyes were impossibly still, like the surface of a frozen lake. "You asked to see," she said quietly. Zane blinked. "See what?" She didn't answer. Instead, she held out a small folded square of parchment, worn and smudged with fingerprints. Then, without another word, she turned and walked off into the dark. No flashlight, no hesitation. Her silhouette faded into the trees like smoke. Zane closed the door and opened the paper under his desk lamp. It wasn't printed. It was drawn by hand. A map, rough but deliberate. It showed a trail leading northeast into the mountains, past a rock outcrop he hadn't noticed before. There was no title, no legend, just a red X near the top of the ridgeline, and a single word in block letters: Ascend. He didn't sleep much. He lay in bed, listening to the wind scrape across the roof like fingernails, the map pressed flat against his chest. Something inside him already knew he would go. It wasn't about the story anymore. It was about the pull, the same one Daniel mentioned. By dawn, Zane had packed lightly a single bottle of water, a protein bar, and his digital recorder, which he hid inside the lining of his jacket. He didn't tell anyone he was leaving. There was no one left to tell. The trail from the map began behind a thicket of aspen just beyond the main road. It wasn't marked, just a faint depression in the ground, as if few people had ever taken it. Within 10 minutes of walking, the trees began to change. Everything felt taller, older. The sunlight barely reached the ground. The air had weight to it. He checked the map every so often, trying to match landmarks, a split tree, a ridge of pale rock. But mostly he moved by instinct. The deeper he went, the more distorted the sounds around him became. His own footsteps echoed strangely, as though they were being repeated seconds later, farther off. By midday, the path opened into a clearing. Smoke curled from the center of a blackened fire pit. Around it, 11 figures stood perfectly still, wrapped in gray robes that blended into the rocks and trees. They weren't chanting. They weren't moving. Just standing. Zane froze. One of them stepped forward. It was the woman from the night before. "You arrived," she said. "Do not speak. Do not record." Witness her voice was firmer now, commanding. Zane nodded. He stepped into the ring. There was no welcome, no explanation, just the smell of something burning. Not wood, not incense, but something darker. Copper. Ash. Something that reminded him of old blood and burned photographs. Then, from the forest edge, a new figure emerged, taller than the others, clad in robes of jet black with a hood pulled low and a mask of carved bone that hid everything but the mouth. It didn't speak, yet Zane felt something, pressure inside his skull, a presence pressing against his thoughts. The robed woman whispered, "The flame sees you." She threw a powder into the fire, white, crystalline. The fire burst into a tall white plume, a sharp chemical brightness that made Zane's eyes water. And in that instant, the mountains seemed to inhale. Then, everything went black. Zane woke before the sun rose. His breath came in visible puffs as he dressed in layers. The map still burned into his memory. Outside, the sky was a dull gray, the kind that made everything feel like it was underwater. No bird song, no traffic, just silence and frost. He slipped the hidden digital recorder into the inner lining of his coat and stepped outside. The trail, if you could even call it that, started just beyond the tree line. No markers, no signs, only memory and instinct. He paused at the edge of the woods, turning once to look back at the cabin. It looked wrong in the morning light, hunched and weathered like it knew he wouldn't return the same. Then he crossed the threshold and entered the trees. The forest swallowed him almost immediately. Light barely pierced the canopy. The deeper he went, the older everything felt. Like these trees weren't just part of the mountain, but older than it. The map had marked a series of visual landmarks. A dead tree split down the middle like a lightning scar, a ridge of pale white stone shaped like a crooked finger, a twisted thicket that bent the path like a serpent's curve. Zane moved slowly, carefully, not because he was tired, not yet, but because the air itself felt charged. Every breath was colder than the last. Every step crunched like it echoed across 100 empty miles. The silence was no longer peaceful. It was expectant. By midday, the incline had grown steeper. His legs ached. The elevation was beginning to wear him down. His lungs begged for thicker air, but the mountain offered none. Then came the first sound, chanting. So faint it could have been imagined, rhythmic, droning, just on the edge of hearing. He stopped, turned his head, and it disappeared. But when he moved again, it returned. The trail bent sharply, forcing Zane around a jagged cliff. He pressed himself close to the rock as he passed, the drop beside him steep and unforgiving. When he came around the bend, he saw it, a wide stone plateau carved into the mountainside, scorched black like it had been struck by lightning 1,000 times. In the center sat a smooth, flat altar of obsidian, reflecting the gray sky above. A single figure stood beside it. Cloaked in ash-gray robes, the person turned as Zane approached. It was a woman, older, with silver hair braided tightly down her back. Her skin was pale, her lips chapped, and her eyes blind, clouded and unfocused, yet staring straight through him. "You made the climb," she said. Her voice was gravel wrapped in silk. Zane said nothing. Something told him this wasn't the time for questions. She lifted a hand, pointing to a narrow path winding up the rocks. "Tonight, the flame calls," she said. Then she vanished into the mountain. Zane stood still. The sky churned above him. Smoke drifted on the wind, tinged with metal. This wasn't spiritual, it was ancient. Watching, and whatever waited above wasn't human. He climbed. The climb had become savage. The trail was now nothing more than a path of jagged stone, half swallowed by snow and ice. Zane moved in a trance, lungs burning, legs shaking. His gloves were soaked through, fingertips stiff and numb. Wind ripped around him but offered no relief, only the shriek of something distant, something that sounded too much like voices echoing through the peaks. Trees had vanished long ago. Now there was only rock, bone-white snow, and silence. The map had no more guidance. This was the end of it, the end of everything. Then he reached it. A flat stone summit opened before him like a wound cut into the mountain's crown. At its center stood a massive circle of blackened stone, ringed by 12 towering monoliths. Each one was carved with glyphs that flickered subtly in the dim light, as though reacting to his presence. The ground within the circle was scorched, cracked in spiderweb patterns that radiated out from a smooth obsidian altar. 12 figures stood still as statues beside each monolith, hooded in gray. No faces, no motion. But Zane could feel their eyes. Beneath those hoods, he felt their hunger, and standing at the center, before the altar, was her. No longer in robes, the woman was bare-skinned but painted with ash and blood. Symbols, spirals, slashes, eye-shaped glyphs covered her arms, legs, chest, even her neck. Her long silver hair fell loose, brushing her waist. Her eyes, still blind, were open, unnaturally wide. "You've come far," she said. Her voice didn't echo, but it filled the air like smoke. Zane didn't answer. His throat was too dry, his thoughts splintered. "You've brought the voice," she continued. "The flame listens. It remembers." She stepped aside and gestured toward the altar. Zane moved forward slowly, drawn by some gravitational pull. His boots scraped across the stone, and the sound echoed in his skull. As he approached, the 12 hooded figures slowly turned to face him, as one, their heads tilted in unnatural unison. The woman raised her arms high. "Speak your name," she commanded. Zane tried to swallow. "Zane," he rasped. The second his name hit the air, the world stopped. Wind died, light dimmed, even the clouds above seemed frozen. The figures began to chant. A deep, layered sound poured from them, not words, not song, but resonance. It vibrated in his chest, his bones. The air thrummed with it as if reality itself was trembling. The woman stepped back and pointed to the altar. "Place what you've carried." With shaking hands, Zane reached into his coat and pulled out the recorder. It felt alien in his palm now, like an artifact from a forgotten world. He placed it on the altar. The chanting deepened. The sky bled darker. The woman raised her head to the heavens. "Flame beyond the flesh," she cried. "Bear witness to the vessel who brings the voice, the one who walks between sound and silence." The chanting stopped instantly. Then the fire came. Each of the 12 monoliths erupted into vertical pillars of pale blue flame. They didn't roar or crackle. They hummed cold and sharp, casting no heat. The flames bent inward as if bowing toward the altar. The woman stepped forward again, her voice now distant and layered. "From stone, we rose. In voice we endured. Through him we return." The flames crept forward across the ground like searching tendrils. Zane tried to step back but couldn't. His feet were locked to the stone. His breath came in sharp, shallow bursts. The fire stopped just short of the recorder. It didn't burn it. It illuminated it. The woman placed her hands above Zane's head, fingers trembling. "When you return to the world below," she whispered, "you won't remember clearly. Your thoughts will fracture, your sleep will twist, but the voice, it will survive. It always does." She touched his forehead. His vision split. Sound warped. Time slowed. The altar glowed, the recorder now shining with a pale blue light, pulsing in rhythm with his heartbeat. Zane dropped to his knees. And then the flames rushed in. The world dissolved, and the last thing he saw before everything went black was the recorder, still glowing, still recording. Zane woke to cold pressing against his skin like wet cloth. He was lying on his back, surrounded by snow, the sky above him a flat canvas of lifeless gray. His limbs felt stiff, foreign. For several long seconds, he didn't know where he was, or who he was. His name came to him slowly, like something borrowed. Then the pain returned. His joints ached, his chest burned with each breath. He sat up slowly, snow falling from his coat in frozen sheets. His mouth was dry, his tongue cracked. Blood had dried at the corners of his lips. Around him, the mountaintop was empty. No circle, no altar, no monoliths, just wind and rock. The summit looked untouched, as though no one had stood there in centuries. And yet, something was there. A single object lay beside him, half buried in the snow. The recorder. It hummed faintly, vibrating in the snow, a soft mechanical pulse, still warm, still recording. Zane stared at it, his breath catching. Memories clawed at the edge of his mind. Blue flames, blind eyes, the weight of a voice not his own moving through his mouth. But every time he tried to focus, it slipped away like smoke between fingers. He reached for the recorder and stood. The wind stung his cheeks. The cold had teeth now, biting through his soaked gloves and into his bones. The trail back down felt unfamiliar. He looked for the landmarks he remembered, the forked tree, the serpent-shaped ridge. But the mountain had shifted. Paths that had once been clear were now twisted. Rocks had moved. Even the light seemed wrong, dimmer, like the sun had lost interest in this place. He walked anyway. Hours passed, maybe more. Time folded in strange ways. Somewhere in the descent, Zane began to hear things. At first, just faint echoes, wind whistling through crevices. But then, words, voices. One moment, silence. The next, a whisper drifting through the trees like breath. Zah. He stopped, turned. No one. He pressed on, pace quickening. More whispers came. Some sounded like his name. Others didn't. Some were laughter, others sobs. Always quiet, always just behind him. When he turned, nothing. The forest darkened too quickly. Branches seemed to reach lower. Trees leaned inward. The path narrowed with each step, like the mountain wanted to keep him. He passed a spot he was certain he'd marked, a stone shaped like a crooked tooth. But now it was gone. Even the air felt different, thicker, tighter, like it was pressing down on his thoughts. By the time the cabin came into view, Zane's hands were trembling. Relief flooded him so suddenly he almost dropped the recorder. He stumbled toward the porch like a drowning man clawing for the surface. But something was wrong. The cabin was dark, silent. The front door stood open, swinging gently in the breeze. He stepped inside. No warmth, no fire, just stillness. Dust hung in the air like ash. The familiar scent of old wood and pine was gone, replaced by something sterile. His notes were still on the table, but different. Pages wrinkled, ink smeared, as if someone had spilled water or tears across them. Some were torn, others were blank entirely. The wall where he'd hung the photographs, the missing persons, the local newspaper clippings, was empty. The frames lay shattered on the floor, the paper shredded into curling pieces. Zane swallowed hard and pulled the recorder from his coat. It buzzed again, pulsing like a heartbeat. He pressed stop. It obeyed, instantly. But the silence that followed felt wrong. It wasn't relief. It was waiting. He didn't sleep that night. He tried. Laid on the cot, blanket wrapped tight, eyes closed. But every time he drifted close to sleep, the chanting returned. Not in his ears, in his head. The same rhythm from the mountain. 12 voices, not language, sound. And always, beneath it, a 13th whisper. Not quite human, not quite his. He dreamed of fire and ash, of walking through caves lit with blue flame, of speaking words he couldn't understand while others watched, faceless and still. He woke gasping, heart racing, throat raw. The recorder sat beside him on the table. He reached for it with shaking fingers. The file was still there. 4 hours, 12 minutes, 13 seconds. He hit play. The first few seconds were static. Then the chanting began. Low, deep, familiar. Then a voice. His voice, speaking fluently in a language he'd never learned. Words that burned on the way out. But beneath it, someone else. Another voice speaking with him, perfectly timed, perfectly matched. Not an echo. A companion. Zane dropped the recorder. It hit the floor with a soft thud, but it didn't stop playing. Zane left the mountain 2 days later. He had slept only in fits, dreams stitched from flashes of blue fire and broken chanting. Something about the silence on the second day told him it was time. The mountain had given him what it wanted, or taken it. He gathered what little he'd brought, the notebook, the worn jacket, the recorder still humming in his pocket, and stepped outside. He locked the cabin out of habit, or respect, maybe because he feared leaving something open behind him. The sky was gray. It hadn't changed since the summit. He wondered if it ever would. The road down the mountain was long and quiet. Tires crunched gravel like brittle bone. Trees leaned in closer. The snow had thinned, but the cold hadn't. He drove without music, afraid of what might bleed through the speakers. When he finally reached town, something felt wrong. Not visibly, not yet. But there was a stillness, a pressure in the air, as if the town had taken a breath and forgotten how to exhale. He passed the old gas station, lights off. The diner closed. No sound, no traffic, no people sipping coffee or walking dogs. Curtains twitched as he passed, but no faces, just movement behind glass. The town was alive, but watching. He checked into a roadside motel with buzzing fluorescents and cracked linoleum. The desk clerk didn't ask for ID, didn't speak, just handed over a key and stared too long, pupils dilated like black holes. The room smelled like old smoke and lemon-scented cleaner. Zane locked the door, then locked it again. He placed the recorder on the nightstand. It vibrated softly, almost imperceptibly, as if it were breathing. He didn't play it, couldn't. Every time his finger hovered over the button, his hand trembled. The memory of the voice, his voice, speaking things he didn't know, burned in the back of his skull. That night, the vibration grew stronger. At first, brief pulses. By 2 a.m., they were rhythmic, pulsing like a heartbeat in sync with his own, then out of sync, then faster. He shoved it into a drawer and slammed it shut. Silence returned, but not peace. The next morning, he walked into town. The streets looked normal, almost too normal. Cars in driveways, lights in kitchens, but no people, no sound. The square, once bustling with antique shops and Sunday markets, was empty. Signs faded, flyers curled. The smell of something faintly burned hung in the air, wood smoke tinged with metal. He went to the library. The bell didn't ring. Inside, lights were on, but no one sat at the desk. No footsteps, just the buzz of bulbs and creaking shelves. He wandered into the archives. He searched everything, rituals, disappearances, the mountain. Nothing concrete, just gaps, headlines with no stories, blank pages, clippings that crumbled in his hands. One photo stopped him, a panoramic of the town from the early 1900s, sepia-toned, familiar peaks, the summit. But something was wrong. In the corner, just near the edge, a shape, tall, black, flame-like. When he blinked, it was gone. He turned the page, burned edges, a headline. Town reels from strange fire. No story, no date. You went up there. He turned sharply. A woman stood near the aisle. Pale, heavy coat, eyes too wide. "You crossed the line," she said. Zane stayed silent. "You hear it now, don't you?" she whispered. She stepped closer. "The hum, the breath in your walls, the things that almost sound like words," she nodded. "They don't stay quiet once they're fed. The flame remembers." Then she was gone, disappeared down an aisle like smoke. He left the library shaking, tried to eat, couldn't, tried to call someone. No signal. That night the recorder turned itself on, still locked in the drawer, but humming. Then it played, not loudly, just enough. A whisper in the dark. It said his name, not in his voice, not in any voice he knew. A chorus of ash and time. He hurled it across the room. It landed softly, didn't break, didn't stop. It glowed. The mirror across the room cracked top to bottom, thin veins of glass like a wound opening. And outside, the streetlight blinked. 12 short, 1 long, 12 again, just like the chanting, a countdown or a calling. The flame hadn't stayed behind. It came with him, and the town knew it. The blackouts started the next night. Zane remembered brushing his teeth, turning off the bathroom light, laying down in bed with the recorder tucked in a drawer under his jeans. Then nothing. When he opened his eyes, he was standing in the motel parking lot, barefoot, shirtless, hands smeared with something dark and sticky. It wasn't blood, but it wasn't just dirt either. He stared at his palms, heart pounding. A man across the lot stood smoking by his truck. He looked at Zane for a long time, then slowly got in and drove away. No questions, no words. Zane returned to his room and checked the drawer. The recorder was gone. He found it on the nightstand, powered on. Timestamp blinking. It had recorded 6 minutes and 12 seconds of audio. He listened, his voice, mumbling, words layered over each other, like he was speaking in 2 tongues at once. One sounded like pleading, the other ritual. A third voice appeared near the end, not human, deep, like stone cracking underwater. He stopped the recording, deleted it, but the sound clung to his ears long after. The blackouts returned the next night, and the one after. He began waking up in strange places. Once in the motel hallway, hands pressed flat against the walls, like he was listening for something inside them. Once in the back alley behind the diner, kneeling in a circle of ash he didn't remember making. The worst was the grocery store. He came to in aisle 7, standing in front of shelves of canned soup, whispering into a woman's ear. She stared straight ahead, eyes wide, not blinking. He stepped away and she collapsed, convulsing, screaming, a wet scream like she was choking on smoke. Others rushed to help her. No one looked at him. No one asked. That night he tried to leave town. He packed his things, started the car, made it 2 blocks before he hit a wall of fog. Not metaphorical, literal. Thick, pale blue, too dense to see through. It hadn't been there a second before. He reversed, heart pounding. The fog stayed behind him the whole way back to the motel, trailing like something that didn't need legs. He didn't try again. Instead, he wandered. The town was shifting. Mailboxes now rusted where they weren't before. Streetlights flickered in that same rhythm. 12 short, 1 long. Strangers passed him and whispered things he couldn't understand, then walked away like nothing happened. And then came the voices. Not inside his head this time. Outside, in the walls, in his phone, even when it was off. Whispers through vents. One morning he woke to find symbols drawn in ash on his motel mirror. Not with his hands, but familiar. He wiped them away, but they came back. He spoke to no one, but people spoke to him. At the library, the woman with the coat was waiting again. "You're the vessel," she said. Zane didn't respond. She smiled sadly. "The mountain didn't change you. It awakened what was already there." He left before she could say more. That night, he sat on the motel floor with the recorder between his knees. It hadn't hummed in days. Now, it pulsed like a living thing. He hit play. This time, it didn't play his voice. It played everyone's. Whispers, screams, chanting, laughter. A dozen voices layered over one another. Then his own voice clear. They know now. The window cracked again. The mirror shattered completely. The light flickered 12 times. And then, silence. Something had crossed over. It wasn't just inside him anymore. It was spreading. Zane didn't remember falling asleep, but he remembered waking up. He was in the woods again, though he hadn't left the motel, barefoot, wearing old clothes that felt borrowed from another time. The trees were too tall, the air too still. He turned slowly. No path, no stars, only trees like ribs around a heart. In his hand, the recorder, glowing faintly blue. A voice whispered inside his chest, "Ascend." He woke in bed, sweating. The window was open. He'd locked it. Symbols had returned on the mirror, this time in blood. His palms were cut, thin, clean, deliberate. He bandaged them and dressed. The recorder was gone. Again, he found it in the motel lot facing the mountain. Zane understood. It was time. He walked, no car, no map, just the pull. He passed houses with flickering lights and open doors. Inside, people sat still, eyes shut, lips moving like prayer. Children drew chalk symbols. Old men wept among candles. No one stopped him. They were waiting. The forest didn't resist. It welcomed him. The wind, cold and dry, carried voices, his and others. The path glowed faintly, lit by memory. At the ridge, the blind woman waited. She didn't speak. She stepped aside. Zane climbed. The summit had changed. The altar now pulsed like it had veins. Figures stood around it, dozens, robed, silent, some with faces, some without. Some familiar from photos, some from dreams. The flame burned blue. No heat, just light. The recorder in his coat vibrated until the casing cracked. He pulled it out. It hissed. Then it spoke. "The vessel is ready." The figures began to hum. Low tones, not words. Zane stepped forward. No fear, only purpose. He knelt before the flame. The woman reappeared, placed a cold hand on his head. "You were meant for this," she said. The fire reached, not up or sideways, but inward. Zane opened his mouth. What came out wasn't his voice. It was a language with no vowels, older than breath. The mountain trembled. The wind died. In town, in basements, on streets. Everyone stopped and listened. The sacrament had begun. Zane didn't remember collapsing, only the weight afterward. He awoke at the base of the altar, alone. The figures were gone, the woman, the voices, the flame, but something was still burning inside him. Not fire, not pain, something else. His vision was blurry, but he saw symbols etched into his skin, glowing faintly beneath the surface like veins full of electricity. He stood, no dizziness, no hunger, no fear. His breath came slow and deep, but each inhale felt borrowed, like the air didn't belong to this world anymore. The mountain was silent, no wind, not even birds. He walked downward. Each step echoed like it was happening in two places at once, here and somewhere else, somewhere beneath. The trail was straight now, no more shifting, no illusions. It wanted him to return. The trees no longer watched, they obeyed. Halfway down, he passed a woman with a torn coat and bare feet. She didn't speak, didn't blink, just stared as he passed. Behind her, others stood in the trees, watching. One by one, they emerged from the forest, all facing him. Zane kept walking. He reached the town just after dusk. The houses were lit, but no one was moving. The same candles burned. The same people sat, exactly as before. Only now, their eyes followed him. All of them, even children, even pets. No fear, no recognition, just readiness. He reached the motel. His room door was ajar. Inside, the recorder sat on the bed, playing. He picked it up. It was his voice, but slowed, distorted, speaking words he didn't understand, words that felt alive, crawling through his ears into his thoughts. The mirror had cracked. Symbols still lingered in the glass, but now they pulsed when he moved. He dropped the recorder. It didn't stop. Instead, it spoke. He has returned. The light bulb popped overhead. The TV switched on, showing static. Then a grainy image, a field at night surrounded by figures. A shape writhing in the center, bound, screaming. Zane's breath caught. It was him. But not from now, from decades ago. Impossible. He stepped back. The mirror flashed. He was no longer alone. Behind him, the blind woman. But now her eyes bled down her cheeks, and when she opened her mouth, it was full of ash and teeth that weren't hers. She raised a hand and whispered, "You are no longer a vessel. You are the gate." The motel door slammed shut. The world outside dimmed, and somewhere, beneath all things, the earth shifted. From his chest, something moved, a sound that wasn't a sound, like a name that had never been spoken aloud, and Zane understood. He hadn't brought back a presence. He had brought back a place, a world hidden beneath this one, crawling just beneath the floorboards of reality, waiting, bleeding through him, opens. Zane stepped outside the motel and the air felt wrong. Not just cold, hollow. Like the atmosphere had been thinned, like someone had scraped off the top layer of reality and left only bone beneath it. Streetlights flickered without sound. The stars above blinked in unnatural rhythms, not like celestial bodies, but like signals. He looked around. Every door on the street was open, every window unshuttered. People stood in silence, not moving, not blinking, all facing one direction, him. Some held candles, others held nothing at all. A child gripped a rabbit's foot until it bled. An old woman wore a blindfold made of twine and fingernails. No one spoke. Zane tried to move. His limbs resisted at first, like wakened from sleepwalking. But the town welcomed him, the ground responding with soft groans beneath his feet, like it was stretching awake. He walked, not toward anywhere in particular, but deeper, and the deeper he went, the less he recognized. Buildings that weren't there before, alleys that looped impossibly into each other, a church with no doors, only walls lined with teeth. He passed the diner. Inside, the cook was still at the grill, flipping something that didn't smell like food. Patrons sat upright in every booth, heads tilted back, mouths open wide. From their throats came a hum, constant, unified, a ritual frequency. The sound followed Zane down the street. Every building pulsed faintly, like breathing. He reached the old community hall. Its wooden door was warped and splintered, carved with the same symbols that now crawled beneath his skin. They were glowing. He pushed the door open. Inside, the floor was lined with salt. At the center, a chair, ancient and black, shaped like a spinal column twisted into furniture. Coils of hair hung from the ceiling like vines. A man stood beside the chair, young. Zane recognized him. It was himself, or something wearing his face. The thing smiled, but the smile didn't reach its eyes. It was like a rehearsal of humanity. "You brought it back," it said. Zane opened his mouth, but the words inside weren't his. Only air, dust. "I was waiting," the figure said, "but not for you, through you." Zane stepped back. The chair began to rise. No strings, no machines, just will. And beneath it, a spiral, cut into the earth deep. carved by something that didn't use tools. The spiral pulsed, like a heart, a wound, a mouth. The floor cracked, the salt line broke, and something whisper from below. "We are listening." Zane staggered. The other Zane tilted its head. "You think this was about him?" it said, pointing at his chest. "Number that was just the call. You were the answer." The townspeople were gathering behind him. Dozens, maybe hundreds now, all silent, all waiting. The other Zane's eyes rolled back, and from its mouth came a chorus. Not just one voice, but hundreds layered into one. And then everything split. The walls of the hall fell away. The ceiling dissolved. Above him was not sky, but a sea of eyes. Blinking, watching, turning, some human, some not. They stretched into forever, and below him the spiral opened wider. Zane saw shapes moving inside, tall, thin things, crawling, weeping, smiling. They didn't crawl out, they didn't have to, because he was already opening. Zane dropped to his knees, his veins glowed, his breath smoked. The mirror from his motel room appeared before him, floating, framed in bone, and he saw not himself, but this town. Empty, forgotten, and then behind it, a black plane of nothing, rolling toward him like a tidal wave of silence. It hit. Zane screamed, but his scream bent in reverse, sucked into him, pulled down the spiral, and from that pit, something smiled. Back, Zane fell without falling. The world didn't tilt or fade. It unraveled. The floor beneath him didn't open. He did. He wasn't standing anymore. He wasn't even human. Not entirely. He was part of something old, threaded into the cracks beneath the town, written in the ash of bones long since forgotten. And the spiral kept widening. He felt it in his marrow, pulling, twisting, stretching time and thought into thin strands. His memories melted, faces blurred, voices became backward echoes. He tried to speak, his mouth opened, and a shadow poured out. Not lightless, but thoughtless. A darkness made of everything he tried to forget. He was no longer in the community hall. Now he stood on a black plain of broken things, buildings, bones, whispers. The sky above was not sky. It was a churning mass of forgotten gods, blind and dreaming. One opened its eye. Zane screamed, but it was laughter that came out. Laughter in a dozen voices, none of them his. He turned and saw himself again. Younger, broken, from the old case files, from the footage, the Zane who vanished years ago. But this one was smiling. He spoke without moving his lips. "This is the spiral, and it remembers you." Zane reached out, but his hand cracked, splintered like wood, then reformed with every breath. Everything was becoming unstable. He looked down. He stood atop a circle of mouths, not drawn, living, sewn into the earth, each whispering a word of his past, his mother's voice, his father's final breath, Officer Rain's warnings, Eli's screams. They repeated, over and over. He is the gate. The spiral watches. You were never alone. The spiral beneath him pulsed, alive, and from its center, a figure rose. It was not a creature, not a god. It was a shape in a cloak of stitched flesh, tall and root-thin, its head crowned in rusted metal. Its face was a door, not symbolic, an actual door, hinged, latched. It turned toward Zane, and the door creaked open. Inside, nothing. But Zane felt his skin tighten. The marks beneath his flesh shifted, responding to what they saw. The spiral called his name, but not as sound, as sensation. His bones vibrated in its frequency. His heartbeat was no longer his. The creature stepped forward. It spoke with 100 mouths in unison. He is the last one. Through him, we return. Zane fell to his knees. The spiral yawned wide beneath him, and for the first time he saw it clearly. It was not just a pattern. It was Script, a language of creation, written backward. He was the last sentence, the final period. As he looked into the spiral, something looked back. A version of himself, but wrong. Bent, stretched, hollowed out. With eyes full of sky and teeth that clicked in rhythm. It didn't smile. It only spoke. When you close your eyes, we breathe. Then it lunged. Zane gasped. He was back, on the motel floor, gasping, drenched in sweat, skin still marked. But the spiral was still moving. In him. In the town. He looked outside. Every window was lit. Every street full of watchers. And above it all, the spiral, burning into the sky. The motel room was no longer a room. It had become a shrine. Salt lines circled the floor in cracked patterns. The wallpaper peeled like shed skin. The air smelled of ash and old breath. But the recorder, still on the floor, was glowing again. Zane stared at it, not because he didn't recognize it, but because it wasn't his anymore. It had changed. No longer just a recorder. It was pulsing like a heart. Its seams had split slightly, and something dark leaked from inside, staining the carpet in a slow spiral. It clicked, then played. And what came out wasn't his voice. It was Rain's. Older, hollow, weary. Case file 739. Zane, The voice paused. Static choked the sentence. Final update. If anyone finds this, you're already too late. Zane's breath caught. The recording continued. He went missing during the storm. Again. Just like before. The town's changed. Rewritten. I can feel it. Old places are gone. New ones grew in their place. But no one remembers them being different. Not even me. Until now. The mirror cracked wider. Zane looked into it and saw Rain, sitting at her desk, eyes sunken, face gaunt. She looked 20 years older. Her hands trembled as she scrawled symbols into a legal pad. They say Zane was obsessed, but what if the obsession was the point? What if that's how it spreads? In the motel hallway, footsteps, barefoot, slow, wet. Zane didn't move. The door didn't lock anymore. If this is the last file, I want someone to understand what he found wasn't a killer. It wasn't a cult. It wasn't even a pattern. Outside, the lights flickered. A woman whispered something just beyond the threshold. A single word. Again, the recorder clicked. It was a memory, living beneath us, eating through the seams of our stories. Zane knelt beside the device. The symbols on his arms flared. From the mirror, Rain's eyes widened, like she could see him. Zane, if you're hearing this, you're not Zane anymore. A pause, then static, sharp, violent, then another voice, familiar. His own. I see it now. The first spiral wasn't carved. It was spoken. A name. Not of a person, but of a place that waits for us to remember it so it can return. Zane stood. The motel door creaked open by itself. Outside, no longer the street, but the forest, twisted, black, breathing. The town had folded into itself, bending back to the beginning. Inside the doorway, a child stood barefoot, clutching a recorder. Zane whispered, "Who are you?" The child tilted their head. I'm the first one who remembered. The lights died, the mirror shattered, and in the dark the recorder clicked one last time. The town has rewritten itself. Zane was never real, but the spiral is. The motel room was gone, so was the street. The town had folded inward, not destroyed, but rewritten. Zane stood at the edge of a street that shouldn't exist. The buildings were wrong, off by inches, colors too vibrant, windows staring without glass. Trees grew from pavement, stop signs twisted into spiral shapes, and above it all, the sky. It wasn't sky anymore. It was bone white, veined with cracks as if something massive pressed against it from the other side. Zane walked. Every step echoed like he was inside a cathedral made of memory. The people were still here, standing still, watching, whispering. Only now they whispered his name. But it wasn't Zane, they said. It was something older. A word carved into the core of him, one he didn't recognize but understood. He passed a school. The swings moved on their own. Inside, children faced the blackboard, drawing spirals over and over, their arms never tiring. Their mouths moved silently. One child turned and whispered, "This is not a town." Zane blinked, and he was somewhere else, back in the woods, the original spiral carved in rock before the murders began. But now it stretched for miles, the trees bent inward, curving toward the center like a vortex. Figures stood in a ring, unmoving. Rain was there, eyes hollow, face wet with ink. "Why did you come back?" she asked. Zane didn't answer. Because he didn't remember coming back. He only remembered waking up. Again and again, in different years, different bodies, always the same spiral, always the same town. He looked down at his hands, younger, then older, then gone. The spiral carved itself into him, not symbolically, literally. A scar opening from his chest down his stomach. Something was inside, moving. He screamed and woke in the diner, half-eaten food on every plate. The cook gone. A mirror on the wall showed not his face, but a street buried under dust and salt. The door creaked open. Outside, the town bled into nothing. A flat white plain with fragments of buildings scattered like memories after trauma. Zane walked. He reached the center. A spire rose from the ground, twisting, made of teeth. At the base, the altar. From before, the one on the mountain. But this one was inverted, facing downward, a black hole of ritual, waiting, whispering. This was never about you. The ground split, and underneath, nothing. No hell, no fire, just the absence of narrative, no logic, no meaning. Zane fell to his knees. He felt himself thinning, stretching, becoming transparent. A town that had never existed was remembering itself, and through it, the spiral would be reborn. He looked up one last time. The sky peeled open, and behind it, his face. But wrong. Stitched together, smiling, waiting, he whispered, "One more chapter, then it begins again." Zane stood at the edge of the final altar, breathless. Below him, nothing. Not a void, not darkness, but the absence of everything that ever mattered. He looked down at his hands, no longer marked, no longer his. They shimmered in and out, becoming ash, memory, and outline. The town had gone quiet, not silent, quiet all, like breath held before the final word, and above the sky cracked again. But this time it spoke. Not in words, not in sound, but in a deep, guttural understanding. The spiral is not an opening, it is a closing. Zane stepped towards the hole. Behind him, the watchers stood still. Rain was among them, tears in her eyes, but no mouth left to cry. Only symbols, burned where lips once were. Zane looked to her. She nodded, slowly, as if to say, "We were never meant to survive this." The spiral widened, stone folded into dust, buildings flattened without collapse, the streets inverted, sinking inward like a film melting in reverse. Zane stepped off the edge. He didn't fall. He spread. His mind fractured across timelines. Memories flickered, a childhood that never existed, a case that no one ever opened, a body that was borrowed, a town with no founding date, and in the center of all of them, the spiral. A place, a thought, a voice. It spoke inside him now, gently, lovingly. You were the last page. We have finished reading you. The world folded, like a book closing. Zane felt peace, not comfort, but completion. Then, stillness, for the first time since the murders, since the whispers, since the return. Just stillness. In the motel, the mirror stood untouched. The recorder lay silent. The town was gone. Only salt remained, a white outline in the shape of a man, but not a person. A symbol, a placeholder, waiting for someone to say his name, to open the spiral again. Final entry. Case file 739. Recovered from a fractured drive found buried in pine ash outside an unmarked Colorado field. No town registry, no birth or death records. No known survivors, only a note. He remembered too clearly. And so we remembered him.